My parents were part of a prayer group when I was younger. It worked for them. It worked for the people for whom it worked. I hated it, but more of that later on. There was about 60 people who'd meet every week in a parish hall on Sunday afternoons. Um, uh, 60 people who'd meet in a parish hall every week on Sunday afternoons, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. And it would start off with songs, lots of them. People sat in concentric circles. Main prayer group leaders, the important people, sat in the middle, close to God, I suppose, and then everybody else sat in outside circles. Our family always sat in the very outside circles. It was a Catholic prayer group, so there was a lot of people with a lot of children. Yeah, I said 60, it's about 60 adults, so I suppose adding the children in, there was a lot more people. The first half an hour or 40 minutes were songs, all of which had been written in the 1970s, and they overused agricultural metaphors. The fields of the Lord, the harvest of the Lord, the seasons of the Lord, and, sorry about this, the seed of the Lord, all made regular appearances. And while the songs were awful, I did love learning new chords for the guitar and would try to sit where I could see the best guitarist, an American woman called Barbara, playing. And afterwards, I'd quiz her with queries like, you know, in the third key change of the second last song, you did an interesting chord arrangement of D. What was it? Could you show me? She was patient and very nice. Anyway, after the 40 minutes of songs, there would be a talk, a long one, possibly an hour long, followed by a few more songs and then cups of tea. The teenagers from that prayer group were all in groups, the boys' groups and the girls' group. Periodically, the older men would try to arrange for the boys to be part of a sharing group where we'd all deepen our religion and heterosexuality, talks about prayer and then talks about football or shooting. And I always found a reason not to go. I had an exam, I had to study, I had something else going on. Every now and then, though, the men would arrange a weekend for all of the fellas, the older men and the younger boys to go away, and I wasn't able to get out of those weekends. One of the other teenagers was a fella called Diarmuid, and Diarmuid hated me. And this was mostly the reason I hated everything to do with the prayer group. Diarmuid hated me with all of the hatreds. He'd push me, call me a faggot, spit at me, get everyone else to laugh at me. For a while, I had one friend amongst the rest of the lads, but Diarmuid got to him. On the way to the very worst weekend that I'd ever had as part of this youth group, my one and only friend said to me, Pádraig, you remind me of a girl. Oh, which one? I asked, even though I knew where this was going. Then he said, all of them. My friend, my former friend, that's what he said. So we got to the weekend and I was already hating it, and it was horrible. It was worse than what I thought it could be. A year can feel like a week, but a weekend with lads practicing to be heterosexuals felt like a fucking lifetime. Telling it now and remembering it now, it's all the usual stuff of bullying, name calling, pushing, teasing, laughing. Anytime I tried to say anything, he would retell it in a way that made everybody laugh at me. Like I said, the stupidest thing. He got everybody to call me Sheila, and he seemed to relish in everything. The leaders of the group, the men who were trying to teach us about, being men and being grown up and being manly and godly, they just ignored everything that was going on, even though they saw the whole thing. Diarmuid took absolute and utter delight in it all. I remember that when he used to smile, he always stuck his tongue between his teeth, and I could see him watching me gulp back tears after one awful part of the weekend, after he'd rallied everybody against me. There he was, tongue between his teeth, eyes filled with pure delight as he was smiling at how successful he'd been in being a bollocks to me. I couldn't wait to get back home. A few weeks after that awful weekend away, it was Diarmuid's birthday. The prayer group had this terrible practice of honoring people. So when it was your birthday, somebody else would stand up and honor you in front of everybody. It was awkward. It was modeled on the American parent prayer group that had started off this one in Cork. And it felt like everybody was practicing being something other than Irish by doing this really extroverted, emotional thing in front of everybody else. There was no laughter, there was no crack, there was no banter, there was no story. It was death by sincerity. Anyway, the men, all of whom had seen everything that had happened on this youth weekend, decided that the best way for me and Diarmuid to reconcile was that I would honor Diarmuid in front of everybody by talking for 5 minutes about how brilliant he is on his birthday. So one of the men phoned up, talked to my mother, and then I went onto the phone, and they told me that they thought it was a good idea. Then he'd seen me, this older guy had seen me and Diarmuid hadn't been getting along, he said, and they thought that me telling Diarmuid how brilliant he was would help repair everything. And in the space of about 30 seconds, any respect I'd had for this man and for any of the other older men just disappeared. Blamed the bullied and butter up the bully. So I said, no, I was a frightened child, but I said no. Then he said, you should think about it, Pádraig. And I said, no. And then he said, you definitely should think about it and maybe even bring it to the Lord, as he said it. And I said, no. And then he said, it's really disappointing, the answers you're giving to us, Pádraig. And I said, no. The prayer group didn't last much longer after that. The American parent prayer group had a huge split, and then the Cork version had a huge split. I'm not sure what it was about. I know my parents were very sad that it ended, because the prayer group really did work in terms of community if it worked for you. Lovely people and friendly. It was just hell for me, and I'd have burnt it down every day if it had meant I could have been, I'd have never had to have seen any of them again, especially Diarmuid the Dementor. So I grew up. I was about 14 during this time. I moved away. I mostly forgot about Diarmuid. I moved overseas. I moved back to Ireland. I moved to Belfast. A number of years ago, my sister said to me one day, oh, I have something to tell you, but I've forgotten. Oh, that's very handy, I said. Any idea? Nah, not a clue, she said. And every now and then, I'd text her to say, what was that thing that you were trying to tell me that you have forgotten? She's like, oh, I can't remember. And then on Christmas a few years ago, she said to me, I remember the thing I was supposed to tell you. I've been working away with a guy who keeps on asking me to tell you particularly that he says to say hi. Like every time he comes into the lab, they both work in microbiology. Every time he comes into the lab, he says to her, he doesn't even say hello to her. He says, how's your brother Pádraig? And my sister said, I say that you're grand. And then this fella says, please, please tell Pádraig that I say hi. Please remember to tell him. All right, what's his name? I said. Diarmuid, my sister said. His name's Diarmuid. Do you know him?
Well, good for you, Pádraig. Good for you for saying no. Why are you muted?
Oh, sorry. Yes, yeah. I've become shy. I know.
Yeah, that was.
Yes, it was good to say no.
Yeah.
I remember being frightened at saying no, but just thinking. And it was sad because I used to like all those older guys, or I wanted to like them, you know, the men that used to lead those youth weekends away. But I just remember thinking, you fellas, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is ridiculous. You know, they should have been giving out to your man rather than, you know. I did change his name, by the way. So we're not, I know I did change his name. So
just out of curiosity, if he wanted to get in touch, or where would that go?
I don't know, actually. I've wondered that. I mean, I'd have nothing to say to him. I wish him no ill will, you know. My God, you know, it could have easily been me being that wanker. You know, if I had a different kind of, if I was popular, I'm sure I wouldn't have been friendly to be around. But yeah, I don't know that we'd have much to say. I'd wish him well, you know. But you know, I literally never had an actual conversation with him in my life, apart from him calling me a faggot. So like, it's not like we have anything to build upon. But I do wish him well.
I'm not sure that constitutes a conversation as such.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you're very popular now, but you're still a nice person.
Thanks very much.
Well,